Hey, welcome to our podcast this week, Beyond Sunday Conversations from the Green Room. We are going to pick up on a conversation that we started on Sunday in the sermon from John chapter 5, where Jesus is doubling down on his claim that he has the right to do anything that God does because he, of course, is I am. And in this passage in John chapter 5, when he's confronting the religious leaders, the Pharisees of the day, about their problem with Jesus healing on the Sabbath and him not being allowed to do that, according to them. Jesus uses two titles in this passage that we looked at Sunday very intentionally, and he starts with one title as an explanation for why he can do what he can do, and then he moves to the second title in an explanation of why he can do what he can do. And both of these titles are similar, they're related, and they focus on slightly different things, but together they are the two probably most important and significant titles in all the Bible in reference to Jesus as the Messiah. And it is the titles Son of God and Son of Man. And Jesus intentionally here in this John 5 passage is using both of them to highlight two aspects of his claim to be able to do what God does because he is God. And most people, when they think about those two phrases, and this is the reason why I really wanted to kind of drill down on this in our podcast this week, is because I think most people misunderstand the significance of those two titles. I think most people kind of casually think the Son of God title is just Jesus referring to himself as God, and the Son of Man title is Jesus referring to himself as man. And so they think of these titles and the usage of Son of God and Son of Man as simply Jesus's way to identify the truth of the doctrine of the hypostatic union, what we call the hypostatic union, which is the doctrine that Jesus is fully God and fully man, united in the one person of Jesus Christ. And while he is fully God and fully man, and that is a true theological statement, that's actually not simply what those titles refer to. They certainly allude to that, Son of God, divine, Son of Man, human, but there's so much more than that. In fact, really, if you just simply focus on those titles as being just divine, human aspects of terminology, the way Jesus is referring to that doctrine, you're missing out on the real significance of those titles. And so I wanted to explain a little bit of the nuance of those titles, the depth of those titles, what they're actually referring to help give us some depth in our Beyond Sunday podcast here, to dig a little deeper into the sermon and the power of what Jesus is claiming here in John chapter 5. So first, let's talk about the Son of God title, because this is where Jesus starts. The Son of God title is Jesus telling us who he is. He is divine. It's obvious he's a man. He's living and walking among them. That's not hard to believe. The Pharisees didn't have to be convinced that Jesus was a man. Of course he's a man. They know him. He's Jesus of Nazareth. He was born of Mary. His father's a carpenter, all that kind of stuff. Like, they knew that Jesus was a man. The claim that was amazing was this claim that this man was claiming to be God. And so when Jesus uses the title Son of God, he is claiming to be divine. He's claiming to be I am. And so there's no way around that. That is the claim of who the Messiah is. He is God. But the Son of Man is not simply that he's human. It is a title that is Old Testament used in the Old Testament to speak of what the Messiah is coming to do. It's a title of action, not a title of being. And there's a subtle word that is used in John 5, that is used in Daniel 7, which is the primary passage where this title really emerges from and we get most of our doctrinal weight from. In Daniel chapter 7, in the vision that Daniel gets, he sees one like a son of man. And the reason this is important is because if you just simplify the title Son of Man to mean Jesus is human, then what you're in danger of doing subtly, without intending to, is you're unintentionally opening yourself up to the argument that Jesus was not really human. He was just like a human. And Jesus was really human. He is really human. He's resurrected human being, God and man together even now today. Truly man and truly God. But that term like Son of Man does not mean he's almost a man. It means he's a man in every respect, but he's more than a man. He is also God. And so there's this depth of this title that is surrounding Daniel 7 and the prophecy that's given there that is focusing not on the fact that he's a human being, but the focus is on what this person who is God in flesh is coming to do, what he's coming to accomplish. And this is why it's so significant that Jesus uses these titles here in John chapter 5, because Jesus is focusing, and the whole argument and the whole debate, remember, is over what? The Pharisees are complaining about what Jesus is doing. And Jesus is claiming that he can do whatever it is that God can do because he's God. And so when he uses this title, Son of Man, what he's claiming is, hey, that Son of Man back in Daniel 7, I get to do all that stuff because that's me. Everything that Daniel 7 says the Messiah, the Son of Man, is coming to do, that's what I'm coming to do. And that's why the passage ultimately hits this climax as Jesus is saying, yeah, that's why I can heal on the Sabbath, and that's why I can do all that the Father does, and that's why I can give life. But then it climaxes at the end of this claim that Jesus says is, I am ultimately the judge, and I am coming to judge the world, and I'm coming to set everything right that's been made wrong. And that's why there is this end times focus to this claim of Jesus as Son of Man, because that's what Daniel 7 is focused on, is what the Messiah is coming ultimately to do in the end. So let's talk about this and break it down just a little bit further. First, let's talk briefly about Daniel 7. I don't want to talk about it a lot because I've already talked about it in the sermon. But in Daniel chapter 7, just to review, this Son of Man character is called, he's equated with the Ancient of Days, which is a term used to refer to God being pre-existent, the one who created all things. He's talked about, like I said, as one like a Son of Man. He's a man, but he's different in some way. He's special in some way. And of course, we know he's special because he's divine. Then he says in Daniel 7 that he receives the authority, glory, kingdom, and dominion that only belongs to God. Well, how in the world can somebody have the authority, glory, kingdom, and dominion that only belongs to God? It's that they're God. And ultimately, that's why this is far more than a description of humanity. It's actually a description of a human who is God. He is divine. He is a royal king, and he is a righteous judge who is coming to judge the living and the dead and set everything right that's been made wrong. And so that's why this title, Son of Man, is so significant, is it's pulling all of these things into one future end times prophecy that was given all the way back in the times of Daniel, that Jesus is claiming, okay, that was written about me. So let's talk about some other places in the scriptures. Let's talk specifically about other places in the Gospels where the Gospel writers use this title, Son of Man, because Son of Man is used a lot in the Gospels. The first place we've already talked about in John chapter 5, or the first place we're talking about is in John chapter 5, where the focus is on what the Messiah is coming to do, specifically judge the living and the dead, judge all things, fix and make right what has been made wrong. That's John chapter 5. And only God has the right and the authority to do that. And Jesus is saying, I have the right and the authority to do that. The other place we see Son of Man, or another place we see Son of Man, is in Matthew chapter 9, verse 6. And we're not going to look at all the places Son of Man is used, but I just want to look at some of the important ones. Matthew chapter 9, verse 6 says this, but that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. And then he goes on and he heals a lame man of his problem, And he's basically saying, I'm healing his physical problems so that you'll believe and understand that I can also heal spiritual problems as well. And so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, I'm going to heal this man. So the point is what? The Son of Man has authority to forgive sin. Who in the world can forgive sin? There's only one person that can forgive sin. That's God. Nobody else can take care of sin. And then one other place that I want to point us to is in Matthew 24, verse 30. Matthew 24:30 says, then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And by the way, Matthew 24 is the main chapter in all the Gospels that refer to the end times more than any other. And in Matthew 24, when he points to the end times, and Jesus is saying, this is how you'll know we are in the end times. Here's how you'll know. You're going to look and you're going to see something in the sky that's the sign of the Son of Man. By the way, what is that? That's the return of Jesus. You're going to look up in the sky and you're going to see the Son of Man coming. That's the sign of the Son of Man. And all the tribes of the earth will mourn that they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So here, what's the Son of Man going to do? He's going to return and he's going to what? Judge and make all right that has been made wrong. That is a description in the Gospels of what Jesus is reiterating in John chapter 5 of what he as the Son of Man is coming to do. And that's why he says, I'm the judge that's talked about in Daniel 7, who is the Son of Man. And every single one of those uses and the others that we didn't mention because of time's sake in the Gospels all build on this Daniel 7 prophecy where the coming Messiah is going to be the one who can do only what God can do, and that all climaxes in this end times revelation. There he is coming on the clouds. You better be ready for that moment, because once that happens, you are either rejoicing because your salvation has come, your Savior is here, or you are in dread because judgment has come and your judge has appeared. And so this is all referencing the Son of Man, and that's why it's such a significant title that Jesus uses it in John chapter 5. And to make the point clear that this is not just in Pastor Chaz's head of the significance of this title, the religious leaders of the day understand exactly what the significance of this title is, because they get upset with Jesus. It says here in John 5 that they want to kill him because he's making these audacious claims. And you don't even have to leave it there. You can go to other places where you see how they react to Jesus using this title and claiming this authority. Probably the most famous one is in Matthew 26. In Matthew 26, Jesus is on trial. He's about to be killed and crucified, okay? And here's the lead up to Jesus' crucifixion. He's on trial before the religious leaders. Matthew 26, starting in verse 63, it said that Jesus remained silent. He wasn't saying anything. And the high priest said to him, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, you have said so, but I tell you. And then Jesus quotes a passage from Daniel 7, and he says this is the line, this is the passage, Daniel 7. He says, I tell you, from now on you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. And the high priest hears Jesus say this, and what's his response? He tears his robes and said, he has uttered blasphemy. What is your judgment? And they answered, he deserves death. In other words, when they hear Jesus claim that he's the Son of Man, they rip their clothes and they decide to kill him because they say that crosses the line. Because now you are claiming, they aren't upset when Jesus says, I'm the Son of Man, because they think he's claiming to be human. They're upset because when Jesus says, I'm the Son of Man, they understand he's claiming to be God. Son of Man is a title of divinity, actually more than a title of humanity, because it's saying I alone am the one who can do on earth what only God can do. And this is why This wasn't a misunderstanding between Jesus and the Pharisees, Jesus and the high priest, Jesus and the Roman government or whatever. This was not a misunderstanding. This was clarity. Jesus was being very clear when he's claiming to be God in flesh. And more than that he's claiming the authority that only God has. So when we look at this and we read John chapter 5 in light of the power of this title and how Jesus is taking it and meaning it, in John chapter 5, verses 19 through 29, we ask the question, why can Jesus do everything that Jesus is doing? He's healing on the Sabbath. He's doing the Father's works. He's giving life to people. He's judging the Pharisees. Why can he do all of this? Because he's the promised Son of Man of Daniel 7. He is the Son of God, and he has the authority, and he is the only one who has the authority to do whatever he wants to do, because he's God. And here's why that's offensive. Because that means that this man, who was a carpenter 2,000 years ago from a little town in northern Israel, he has absolute sovereign right over your life. We don't like that. We like to have control over our own life. We like to be able to make our own decisions. We like to be able to blaze our own trail. But John 5 tells us that you do not have the ultimate right over your life. Jesus does. He is your creator, and he is your judge. And you will stand before him one day. One day he will come back on those clouds. One day the trumpet will sound, and you will either meet your Savior or you will meet your judge. And who that is that you meet, because by the way, it's the same person, but who it is you meet is determined by what you do with him right now. Whether you bow your knee and receive him as the Son of God, Son of Man, promised in Daniel to be the one who can forgive sin and give life, or whether you want to have authority over your own life and live your own way. In Revelation, I want to leave you with one passage. In Revelation chapter 1, we said all of these gospel passages and Daniel point to the end times. So let's go there in conclusion. Let's go to the end times. In Revelation chapter 1, John gets a vision of heaven. And in John chapter 1, verses 12 through 18, I want you to see John's vision of heaven, of the Son of Man come together as John sees the Jesus that is talked about in the Gospels, the Jesus that he, John, knew connected with the Son of Man in Daniel 7. Here's what John says he saw. Revelation chapter 1, starting in verse 12. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. And on turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the midst of the lampstands, one like a son of man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white like white wool, like snow. His eyes like a flame of fire. His feet like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace. And his voice was like the roar of many waters. And in his right hand he held 7 stars, and from his mouth came a sharp, 2-edged sword. And his face was like the sun shining in full strength. And when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. But he laid his right hand on me, saying, Fear not. I'm the first and the last, the living one. I died, and behold, I'm alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades. This is why Jesus said he can give life. This is why Jesus said he can do whatever the Father does. And this is why Jesus said that he can judge the living and the dead, because he is the great I am. He is the Alpha, the Omega. He is the Savior and the Judge of all things. And he is your Lord, whether you admit it or not. And one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus is Lord. And you will either bow your knee now so that you will be able to bow your knee in heaven, or you will refuse to bow your knee now, and you will bow your knee in hell. But one way or the other, you will bow your knee to the Son of Man, who is our righteous and living judge forever. God bless you. Hope you have a great week. And I hope and pray that you have that right and wonderful relationship with God as your Savior in Jesus Christ, and not as your judge. God bless.